I have an incredible show today. Recently, we started getting whisperings, not even whisperings, public acknowledgement that the voting systems in America are vulnerable. They can be manipulated. I want to go through all this with my special guest, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Corsi, thank you for joining me again.
Well, it's always a great pleasure and honor to be with you, Stephen. I really enjoyed the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so since our last interview, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who oversees all the U.S. intelligence agencies, said, I quote, "We have evidence of how these electronic voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time and vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of the votes being cast." On our last show, you talked about a lawsuit that you are working on to expose these hidden algorithms. Can you give my audience just a brief 10,000-foot view of the problem, the situation, and then an update on where we're at?
Well, first of all, the article I wrote is an American thinker, and General Flynn co-authored it with me. And the statement that Tulsi Gabbard made was at a televised cabinet meeting recently, and in which her statement was a surprise to everyone because it made it clear that there's now a national security investigation into what I call these algorithms in the state board of election databases. So in other words, if you go to our website, which is God's Five Stones, and that's going to be one of my enduring websites, G-O-D, no apostrophe for the S, and F-I-V-E spelled out the number, and stones, S-T-O-N-E-S, plural, godsfivestones.com, which of course is finding the right five stones that David did to go after Goliath. So I'm after finding the right five stones to go after this globalist Goliath. And certainly the voter integrity is the main issue for beginning the show. But the key here is that Tulsi Gabbard made absolutely clear that President Trump now has, in a sense, bypassed Department of Justice and gone directly to the intelligence agencies. Tulsi Gabbard is Director of National Intelligence and made this a national security investigation. Now, President Trump recently, in March, issued an executive order saying that we were going to go to voter ID and we're going to have proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. And secondly, he said the states that don't secure their elections are going to lose federal funding. Now, what Gabbard is saying, and this is why it's so critical, is that, and there's a whole series of things that have happened in sequence that make it clear that national security is now going to be the focus of election security, is that Gabbard, by making this a national security emergency, that the computers in the state boards of election can be hacked into, because there's no other way these codes can be placed in them, which in Wisconsin, as I'll show you in a minute, produce millions of these modified duplicate voters who don't really exist. Okay, so these are the voters that can be used in mail-in ballot fraud schemes and others, because you're creating false records that you can hide in the database, and then you know where they're located. So when you need 10,000 votes to beat a candidate, you can pull out your modified duplicates and vote them. Okay, because they all get their own individual state ID number, since they all look like they're individual voters. So there may be 4 Jerome Corsis in the database, each of which has a different date of birth. Looks like 4 different people, but it's just taking my record and duplicating it 3 times with different dates of birth. Now, that means somebody got into the computer system to do that. Somebody actually got into the computer system. So what Tulsi Gabbard is saying is that if we have a situation now where our state board of election databases have been penetrated, this could be by foreign actors. Okay, and I can show you a sequence of it. And secondly, the statement was so broad, it also includes the machines that calculate the votes. In other words, all the work and concern about the computers going overseas, the data going overseas that's been done, these are now also included. So the history of knowing that foreigners are penetrating our elections is very important. And I begin this article with General Flynn by going back to January 7th, 2021. This is right after Donald Trump, the certification of the election with Pence occurred on the 6th. Well, on the 7th, the next day, John Ratcliffe, who was then the Director of National Intelligence, wrote a memo entitled Intelligence Community Assessment, Foreign Threats to the 2020 Election. And in it, he said the People's Republic of China sought to influence the 2020 federal elections, and that raised the need for the national intelligence community to address the underlying issues with China. Now, why this is so important, Stephen, is because right now you've got lawfare. You've got all these judges saying, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. If Donald Trump, under Article 2, exercises the powers of commander-in-chief, no court in the land is going to have any say about it. And that means that Donald Trump says that getting our elections, getting these algorithms out of our database and stop using the machines, that we're going to go back to paper ballots. Donald Trump can mandate that, and he can force the states to do it because this is a national security emergency. Okay, now that went unnoticed, I think, by the mainstream media, because intentionally I think they didn't want to see it. But it is a fundamental game change that we're reporting. General Flynn and I are reporting that Tulsi Gabbard is now involved. And then Tulsi Gabbard also made a deal with Arizona, what largely unreported, that Arizona is going to take out maybe up to 50,000 non-citizens that are on their board of voter rolls. Now that could invalidate the entire 2024 election, because if those illegals were on the election records in 2024, how do we know they weren't used? Well, we could find that out if we had the database.
Yeah. Let me ask you one question. I remember waiting for John Ratcliffe of the Director of National Intelligence. I remember waiting on this report. He needed all 17 intelligence agencies to bring this back. It kept getting delayed. If Vice President Mike Pence had taken Ted Cruz's advice, delay, we've got 10 days under the law to do a review, then we'll come back, make Joe Biden the president, or we're going to find something, and then half the country doesn't have to wonder if their election is stolen. Instead, we get this FBI-led insurrection, and Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they immediately swoop in, start all of this January 6th nonsense with the select committee. If we had gotten that report 1 or 2 days earlier, everything in America might have been different.
This is a very important point, and I agree entirely. In fact, that Ratcliffe postponed releasing this report is, I think, a fault on Ratcliffe, and it makes me wonder how effective he's going to be directing the CIA. But again, the fault was Pence's. Pence did not have the courage to take the time that he had under the Constitution, delay it, get this intelligence report. But now, I mean, it's almost like an act of God that the 2020 election was stolen, and we got to see for 4 years how awful Biden was, and this woke and this anti-Americanism, the treason. The Democratic Party is now supporting, Venezuelan gang members who are in MS-13 prisons in El Salvador. Well, I mean, the country doesn't need these thugs on our streets. If the Democratic Party is reduced to that, it's become a treasonous anti-Trump, hate Trump party, and nobody has any use for it. And so, in a sense, God let us see what was going on. And now with Trump in and Tulsi Gabbard, he's taking action. Okay, so on April 4th, 2025, Trump fired National Security Agency Director Timothy Haw and NSA Deputy Director Wendy Noble. Now, this is immediately after Tulsi Gabbard made the statement in the cabinet room. So again, you see the sequence of events where Trump is moving on national security, not relying on the Justice Department to bring cases. Because the key here, Stephen, is, the whole focus of God's Five Stones has been, first of all, we wanted to prevent the algorithms from being used in the 2024 presidential election. And I think we did largely chill it, because the 7 battleground states reported that night, stopped counting, and reported for Trump, all 7 of them, which was different than they did in 2020. When they kept the counting going, they produced all these overnight mail-in ballots, and suddenly Biden was ahead. They didn't do that. but they use the algorithms in the down ballot election. So what we're facing right now is we got to get these algorithms, we got to clean up the computers out of our elections before the midterms in 2026, or the Democrats will certainly steal the House and they'll steal the Senate. I think they stole probably 20 House seats and maybe 5 Senate seats in 2024. And that's the court case you were referring to a minute or two ago when Peter Tickton, who I'm working with very closely, we're working with in daily contact. He's a close friend of Donald Trump. He's known Donald Trump since they were 15 years old. They went to military school together. Peter's law firm is leading the court investigation into this whole voter fraud issue. The case is Rocky Rockford, who ran for a House seat in District, I believe, 14 in Florida, which is Tampa St. Pete, and he was beaten by Nancy Castor, who is far left. And again, it was a stolen election because in the same, balloting, you see that this is a completely last-minute surge on Castor's part, and the mail-in voting again is very important to her winning. Okay, so Peter Tickton is introducing this week a motion in that case challenging that Nancy Castor should be unseated. He's filing for bringing in Department of Homeland Security, Tulsi Gabbard, and letting the intelligence agencies take a look at the election. He's filing that motion in state court right now. So unbeknownst, I think the American people haven't caught on to this yet. But this is really the breaking news we have, I think, in your broadcast, is the appreciation. I mean, Donald Trump is playing, as they say, like three-dimensional chess. He's not going to rely on the Department of Justice and its slow process of investigation and bringing forth cases. He's going to take it with the intelligence agencies and say, we've got a national security emergency here. And that overrides the state's ability to set the rules for the elections or go to court to contest them, because this is under a national security emergency that our elections are insecure, would fall under the Article 2 powers of a commander-in-chief, and he could have the military go in and secure the computers. I mean, Donald Trump is not going to tolerate the same cheating that was going on in the 2020 election. And I assure you that there will be prosecutions, but he's not waiting. The National Intelligence Agencies on this case is a major, major development. General Flynn and I are joining voices to let the American people be aware of this development.
Okay. I interviewed Jovan Hutton Pulitzer last week. He's the guy that did the Arizona audit. He told me, Steve, I saw all the evidence of fraud with my own eyes. I'm still holding the evidence. I'm the chain of custody. I'm paying all this money every single month to hold this until these court cases come. He said, I believe President Trump is putting the 2020 election piece back on the game board, and it's going to be a huge part of winning 2026.
Well, Jovan's right. I mean, Jovan Pulitzer holds a lot of the patents that allow the mail-in balloting to be done. And what he did in Arizona, and I've talked to him recently, is he showed that these mail-in ballots were not folded, so they couldn't have been mailed. They didn't have postmarks on them. They weren't properly checked to see if the signatures matched the signatures and the registration cards. And he has gotten physical custody of a lot of these mail-in ballots, and he's holding them in storage. Well, he's got the evidence that should put a number of people in prison. And, again, getting the courts to handle it is going to take time. With Donald Trump short-circuiting it this way, and with Peter Tickton pressing this case in Florida, and also, by the way, we have recently gotten the House motion was filed by Rocky Rockford to unseat Nancy Castor, and that motion now is being retabled, so it can yet be considered. Okay, and Peter Tickton filed a second lawsuit in Florida, in Tallahassee, in the Capitol, saying that Florida's database is so corrupt it's unfixable. Because again, there are hundreds of thousands of these modified duplicates, and we're finding that they can be used in the mail-in ballot schemes. I mean, these voter rolls are filled with, illegal aliens who are voting, duplicate votes who are non-existing voters. There's so much fraud in these databases the states are using that they're unusable. I mean, if you go into a casino and play 21 and the casino is using marked cards, that casino can't prove you lost any hand. Well, how can you use this database to say that Rocky Rockford lost the election in Florida? Okay, we can get into that data if they'll allow us to have the voter records, and we can show the illegal votes that were cast. Okay, and it's apparent when you see how these schemes are done that the Democrats have rigged the computers. See, the scheme is to be able to get a certifiable fake vote. So you got to create a duplicate that looks like a different voter that gets a separate voter ID. And now you can vote both of them. If you just duplicated the record, that's not good enough. You got to duplicate it and hide it so it's not easily found. And then you know where it is, so you can vote it when, well, I need 10,000, I need 20,000, we're gonna lose by 20,000 votes. Well, print me 20,000 of my false modified duplicate voters. Punch a button, they all request a mail-in ballot. Mail-in ballots are printed, they're run through the machines, and now I've tabulated enough fake votes in order to win the election. Okay, so that's what's got to be stopped.
With everything that's happening in the U.S. economy, it feels like we're walking on shaky ground. Prices are stuck at really high levels, and it seems like nothing is affordable anymore. It's no wonder many are relying on credit cards to cover the gaps. Credit card debt is skyrocketing, and it's leaving a lot of people stressed out. If you're a homeowner, you don't have to face this uncertainty alone. My friends at American Financing can help you take control. They can help you access the debt in your home to help you pay down the high interest credit card debt, giving you peace of mind and real saving. On average, people just like you are saving $800 a month. That's $10,000 a year. Plus, they may close your loan in as little as 10 days. Don't let the chaos of the economy get the best of you. Call American Financing now. It costs you nothing to get started, and you might be able to delay 2 mortgage payments, putting some extra cushion in your bank account. Give them a call at 888-686-8030 or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner. Again, that's 888-686-8030. Let me ask you this. Similar to the Democrats shopping around a judge that would take Trump off the ballot, they go to Colorado, they go to Illinois, they go to other places. Then you have this illegal immigrant thing. Suddenly a judge starts getting the same cases of Trump over and over again magically in Washington, D.C. Did you guys specifically pick Florida because it's a Republican state and this is a case where if you prove it, it's the first domino to fall, or was it just randomly chosen? How did you come to this lawsuit?
It was a couple of factors. You're right. It has a more favorable chance of being heard in a Florida court, which is more conservative, and finding judges who are not hate Trump judges. But the second part is that Rocky Rockford had the determination and courage to want to fight the case. He didn't want to quit. So he's not about to give up. I've interviewed him this week. I'll be writing another article about him this week. But he said, I'm going to fight this. Now, a lot of the candidates that we feel have lost rigged elections don't want to fight it because they get death threats. The left is just insane.
Wasn't there someone in Wisconsin that it looked so obvious that they won, and then he came out and said, I'm not going to fight it. I'm done. I'm out.
It was Eric Hovde. He was running for a Senate seat. And again, he was winning all night long in election night. Then at 4 a.m, 108,000 mail-in ballots show up from Milwaukee. And they're voting much more for his opponent, Democrat, than were voting during the day in Milwaukee for the Democrat. And suddenly Hovde loses. He was holding congratulatory calls all evening. I spoke with Eric Hovde. He just didn't want to fight it. I mean, it felt like he'd spent a lot of his own money on this election, felt like he had been cheated. He was just so bitter and so disappointed. And you know, I fought them. They wanted to put me in prison because they thought I had a tie to Julian Assange, the Mueller investigation. They said if I didn't tell them I tied to Assange, they were going to bring me to a trial in Washington, D.C., and the judge would put me in prison the rest of my life, or I could take a plea deal, tell them I lied and I did have a tie to Assange. That would have made the Russian collusion case. I could not imagine standing in front of a judge and swearing a lie to keep myself out of prison. So I refused their plea deal. My wife at that time supported me, but then 2 years later, she had an affair and broke up our 32-year marriage. She wanted me to pull out of politics. She was just the PTSD, the pressure of it, it broke up the marriage. So, I mean, I know the price you pay to do this. And so I don't fault Hovde, but I do celebrate that Rockford is willing to fight this. And if you go to God's Five Stones, you can see we've got ample documentation in many states that the same pattern is there. And it's rampant throughout our voting systems. And then suddenly all the information on the Dominion machines, that Sidney Powell has been doing, and that Mike Lindell, and that Patrick Byrne, all these people, suddenly the statement that Tulsi Gabbard made legitimated their concerns. And Trump's executive order said we're going to go to paper ballots. Now, everybody listening has got to understand that the fight has just now begun. Okay, because now we've got proof the 2020 election was stolen. We've got proof the Democrats can rig elections, that they have these algorithms in the book. We can prove these things. There's rock solid proof. In Wisconsin, this I'll publish, I think, this week too. Wisconsin, we found when you look at their voter record numbers, there's too many numbers that end in 0. If you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, every number should have about the same number of last positions. Well, about 30% of all the records in Wisconsin's voter roll end in 0. And we found that every record that ended in 0 has 2 voters associated to that one voter ID. Every single one. Now, that, first of all, that violates HAVA because you can't have one voter ID for 2 people. It's got to be unique to each voter. And the second problem is that this had to be a scheme that was done by an algorithm. How could you find every 0 and make sure you made 2 records associated with that, and find 2 records were likely inactive, and have that scheme run through the entire database? This is an algorithmic alteration of the database. That is, when you've got 7 million records, you're not going to go look for zeros and create double records. It would take you forever. A computer could probably do it in 20 seconds. And so we know that we can prove, we've got rock solid proof of voter fraud now. And I think this is now beyond question. And what Donald Trump has done, I think brilliantly, is escalated it into a national security crisis. And he's laid out the framework. And so now we're fighting the lawfare. And the lawfare is going to end, I think, pretty quickly too. Because, first of all, our Constitution is written, there's a big debate in the Federalist Papers between Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton always wanted more government power. Jefferson wanted it to be government limited power. Okay, so they're debating as to whether or not we could have judicial tyranny, is what these judges are trying to do. And Jefferson said, well, the courts will have no enforcement power. So Justice Roberts can do whatever he wants. And if Donald Trump says, I'm not going to go that way, what army is Justice Roberts going to send over to tell Donald Trump he has to? And the American people, seeing that, these judges are demanding that illegal immigrants, criminal, gang members who are committing violent crimes are suddenly getting treated, coddled by the Democrats and these judges, the country's not going to put up with it. And so therefore, the other thing President Trump could do is he could say, our district courts and federal courts, circuit and district courts are all established by Congress under the Constitution, not by the Supreme Court's the only constitutionally mandated court that we have. So President Trump could introduce a bill reorganizing all the federal courts. So the district courts do not have this national reach. They can only make decisions that reach their district. And if that got passed by Congress, every federal judge would lose their lifetime position because their courts would be gone. And Donald Trump could replace all the federal judges. So, I mean, there's things Donald Trump can do.
Yeah.
And I think the American people are understanding that this judicial tyranny that Jefferson worried about, Jefferson had a legitimate point. And you can't have all these judges say, no, we're not going to take the case. You lack standing. We don't want to hear the case. Well, in Florida, they took Rocky Rockford's case. He's got 2 cases in Florida that are being heard. And Peter Titkin is a brilliant attorney. I've rarely met anyone with his courtroom skills. And he's going to pursue these cases doggedly, and they both have a good chance of winning. Now, one case overturned, and the whole country is going to be different in terms of the shock effect that's about to happen. And so, again, we're raising more money. We're doubling our efforts. I'm trying to get General Flynn into the act much more full time. And General Flynn is a very powerful voice on this because, again, General Flynn comes in with the intelligence agency perspective. And when General Flynn says, his military intelligence role was what distinguished him as national security advisor and scared the Democrats when he was appointed by President Trump in the first term. Well, you get our analysis of how these elections are stolen, plus all the other work that's been done by Sidney Powell, Patrick Byrne, Mike Lindell, Jovan Pulitzer, this whole army of people. And we say to the nation, we're not going to let China run our elections, and we're not going to let the intelligence agencies run our election. Because if China's in there, it's very possible that, our CIA, which has interfered in foreign elections since the 1950s, they overthrew Mossadegh in Iran in a coup d'etat. The CIA engineered getting rid of the president of Iran in 1950s. Well, if our CIA has decided they're going to run our elections, not just foreign elections, we've got a problem. And I think John Brennan's got a problem, and Clapper's got a problem. James Clapper's got a problem, because they were supposed to be the ones who were responsible for making sure the CIA was following the laws and was acting legitimately. Instead, they went rogue. They engaged in the Russian collusion investigation to get Donald Trump, and I believe, started interfering in our elections.
Are you familiar with Wayne Allen Root?
Yes.
Okay.
Wayne Allen Root, I've been on his show many times. And
he put out an article in the American Thinker where he basically said the best thing that Trump could do would be to show the American people that the 2020 election was stolen. Number one, it would open everyone's eyes and they would go, oh my gosh, he was right. We need to now get over this. It would also drive a stake in the heart of the Democrat Party, which right now is on the ropes in some sense, but making plans for their comeback in another sense. I think he's onto something there. If we prove this, it changes so much.
Well, Wayne Allen has always been very astute in this, and I've followed him for a long time. And he, knew about Obama. He was, I believe, at Columbia University when Obama was there, and never saw him. So he goes way back in terms of his fighting this corruption and supporting Donald Trump. So his point is actually extremely on target. If Donald Trump can just say, look, everything we know now and everything that God's Five Stones show, everything we're seeing in Wisconsin, we're seeing in Florida, we're seeing in Arizona, these corruptions of these state databases. Why do we have all these non-citizens voting? Why do we have all these people that don't exist voting? Why can't we have if you miss a payment on a credit card, you get a notice right away that you missed that payment. Those systems work. So the voter databases are messed up because that's the way the criminals want them. And it's time we stop the criminals from running our elections. We need to have honest elections, and that's fundamental to our freedoms. Yeah. So, nothing could be more important, I think, than preserving election integrity.
I completely agree. Tell me about this situation going on in Wisconsin.
Well, in Wisconsin, you see the database, and there's in a database of about 7 million voters, there are these 874,000 modified duplicate records, which means a voter has 2 records with 2 different IDs, but they're the same person because they have the same name and they have the same phone number. Okay, so someone has gone into this database and copied records to make a voter two people with two voter IDs. And then the surreptitious voter can be hidden in the database with an algorithmic ID, and then they can be voted when the criminals decide. So when Paquette, when he found these duplicate records, it create these non-existent voters with legitimate state IDs, he cracked the system of essentially how you get algorithm record locators, where it's like a marked card scheme. You could put your marked cards back in the deck where you know where they are, but the other players don't know where they are. And so therefore you can play your marked cards as you need to play them. And that's what, when Paquette found that, I mean, it's an astounding number. You get like 10% of a voter roll in Wisconsin is illegitimate, is criminal. Well, how can, and they use this in this judge's race for Supreme Court justice that was just held, where the Supreme Court justice that won was the far left judge. Okay, now Brad Schimmel, who was running for the judge in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, lost to this Susan Crawford, who was a completely woke. She was being supported by the transgender community. We're holding transgender parties for her. Crawford won 55% of the vote to 45%. Okay, but then you had a amendment to the Wisconsin state constitution, and that amendment carried every one of Wisconsin's 72 counties except Dane County, where Madison and the university is, and Milwaukee County, and it won by 500,000 votes. Now, how do people split their tickets so that Crawford wins by 10%, but this amendment to the Wisconsin Constitution carries every county except 2 and wins by 500,000? And Crawford was out there saying if she got on the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, she was going to veto the voter ID law. And so therefore the Democrats, again, I think the evidence is clear that they stole that election. And Wisconsin's also the one where the zero ending files have 2 records identified with 1 state ID. So you've got another criminal database being used to steal elections. And again, I think this is one where we're asking for Tulsi Gabbard and the intelligence group to get into this. And Wisconsin knows it's in trouble, because what we're pressing with the papers that Paquette has written, and I'm going to do another one. I'm going to write another article this week, hopefully, or certainly next week, on this Wisconsin fraud, because people need to see this. So we've got modified duplicates, which are one name with more than 1 record. And then we've got doubles, which is 1 voter ID with 2 or more voters attached to it who have the same ID. Well, again, these are fundamental violations of HAVA and all the federal voting laws, which say that 1 person, 1 voter ID, no false people, non-citizens shouldn't vote. Yet our state election voter rolls are riddled intentionally with these criminal violations. And they're put there by somebody. We need to find out who put them there. And I think ultimately these are intelligence agency grade complexity. And I do suspect China's involved. And it certainly has the vulnerability to hack our systems. We don't need China, especially when we're going into a trade war with China, having the vulnerability to make sure Donald Trump loses the midterm election, which I assure you China would be happy to do.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on. I'll put those links down below as promised. We'll have you back on soon. I hope you have a productive meeting down there in Florida and a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen. Always a great honor and pleasure to be with you. God bless.
Thank you.